Hey everybody, in this video we're going to take a look at Latin poetry and specifically look at something that usually trips my students up the first time they do it, which is meter and scansion. So just to dive in, we want to understand what's the difference between Latin poetry and sort of other different types of poetry you might have seen, right? And it's not that it's necessarily a difference, but it's something you might not fully kind of understand in your head when you first see it. When you look at more modern poetry, right, the way we call it a poem, the reason we call it a poem is because there's a rhyme scheme. So the poem here is a famous one called If by Rudyard Kipling. And you can see that the words are rhyming. So you have waiting, hating, lies, wise. That's what a lot of people think of with poetry. The same thing with music, right? The rhyming. In Latin, though, it has nothing to do with the rhyming. It has to do with something else, sort of the rhythm of it. So if you look here, this is Catullus 1, which is a poem we're going to be using as we go through this video. There is no rhyme, right? So the final word, you have libellum, expolitum, solebas. There's nothing really happening here where you could say, oh, it's rhyming. I get it. It's poetry. So there's something different about it. What that difference is what we call meter, rather, right? Meter, and it's the rhythm of the poem, okay? So again, you might be thinking, where's the rhyme, right? So in Latin, that rhythm is called meter, and it's meant to be sung and performed. So that's something you want to kind of understand about Latin poetry. It's more closely related to music, I'd say, because you'd be performing it and saying it out loud. You're not just reading it in your head off a piece of paper. And the rhythm, the sort of beat to it, is really how you can unpack Latin poetry, and it'll help you see the skill of these poets and why they were so good, because it does take a lot of skill and word choice to get this right. So how does it all work? Well, Latin poetry is divided into what we call feet. So feet are sort of like measures in music if you're a musician, and I'm not a musician at all, so you might know that better than me, but it's basically pieces of a line, right, that have a certain beat or a certain rhythm to it. And the idea is the rhythm of each foot is based on the syllables, right, and the pronunciation of the syllables. That's how you can tell what's going on. So in case you're curious, what is a syllable? A syllable is basically just the vowel, right? So if you had this word here, ancilla, there's 3 syllables there. You have ancilla, right? Because you have an A, an I, and a second A, right? So you have 3 syllables or 3 vowels. That's how you break the word apart, okay? And the poetry, the poetic part of these lines is how you're going to pronounce and what emphasis and kind of stress marks you're going to put on the different syllables. So hopefully this is making sense so far, right? We have meter, which is the rhythm. We break up lines into what we call feet. They're based on syllables, and we're going to see how this all kind of works together. And this might be something you've seen in class too. Okay. So the key to it, to Latin poetry, is understanding the difference between a long and a short syllable. So every Latin syllable is either what we call long or short, depending on its vowel and the way it's spelled and its positioning, all these different things. The difference is really in pronunciation and sort of length, right? How long you hold the sound. Okay, so to show you a difference here, you have puella and then you have puella, right? That A, the macron over the A, and the ablative singular. Not that you pronounce it that way, it's more emphatic and dramatic to say puella, but you're kind of holding that final A a little longer in the second version of it because you have the macron over the A, right? That's the difference between a long and short vowel and a long and short syllable too, right? You have a sort of different sound there, okay? So what makes a syllable long? Well, the first thing is if the vowel has a macron, right, a long mark. This is what we call long by nature, right? It's naturally long. So that word I gave you before, puella, the A is long. So that would be a long syllable, okay, because it's naturally long. It's got the long mark over it, okay? The second way it can be long is if it contains a diphthong. That's also long by nature because they are naturally long-sounding syllables, right? And remember, a diphthong is a specific combination of vowels that makes a new or different sound. It's not any 2 vowels put together. So I made a video on this a while ago about Latin pronunciation. You can go watch that if you want to see diphthongs. But these are the ones that we use. You have AE, AU, EI, OE, UI, and EU. Okay, and this is why you have sounds like I, ow, a, oi, right? This is the different sounds they make. So the diphthongs, anytime you see a diphthong in poetry, it is a long syllable. And I'll show you why this all is important in a little bit, okay? The third way you can make a syllable long is kind of different. It's something called long by position. And this is where some of my students get tripped up. There are no natural long vowels in it. Okay, so this is kind of something you have to wrap your head around. A syllable can still be long even if it doesn't have any long vowels, right? And it's based on the positioning of the word in the sentence. And I'll show you what that means. But you might be stopping for a minute and saying, what are you talking about? We just said that, long vowels are what makes long syllables. How can it be a long syllable without a long vowel? Got it. Let's try not to get into, putting your mind into a pretzel quite yet, because it does actually make some sense if you just unpack it and take it, one piece at a time. Okay. So it's not as bad as it might sound. But if you have a vowel that's followed by two consonants, this is what my old professor used to call a consonant cluster. Those two consonants will lengthen the syllable in front of it. So in other words, if you have a vowel followed by two consonants, that vowel will be long. We call that long by position. Okay, so in other words, in this word, you have cantata. The first A is a short A, right? But it's long by position because it's followed by two consonants, the N and the T. So it's not naturally long, but its position within the word is making it a long syllable. Okay, so this is how you can kind of change the sound of words in poetry depending on, how they're spelled and how you put them in a sentence. Okay, so that idea of long by position is a really important one. I'll show you as we go with some examples. Everything else, if it's not long by nature, it's not a diphthong, and it's not long by position, it has to be a short syllable. So everything else is short. So hopefully this is making some sense. Again, a little quick check-in. Hopefully we're feeling all right on the idea of long versus short syllables. Okay, there's more though. So it gets a little more complicated. So kind of take notes as you go. There's a couple important extras you just need to think about as you go. And it's Q, U, and G, U. I'll explain. L and R, H, something we call the consonantal I, and everyone's favorite elision. So we'll take them one piece at a time to explain how sort of meter and scansion, which is writing down the long and short syllables, basically, how it gets impacted, and a few things you just have to know. So the first is Q, U, and G, U. So Q, U in Latin is actually not two different sounds. It's one. So Q is always QU. So basically the idea is this: when you have QU and GU, the U doesn't count towards your meter, right? So in other words, the QU and anytime you see QU, it's really Q. And the GU, and for instance, lingua, right? That's not three syllables. So it's not lingua, it's lingua, right? So the GUA is one sound. It's really based off the A, not the U, if that makes sense. And the reason I'm saying that is if you're following the vowels and you're saying every vowel is a syllable, yes, except in this one case, right? The GU or the QU. Otherwise, you're going to be counting too many syllables and it's just not going to work. So that's the note you want to write down. Whenever you have that U coming after Q or G, it's not going to count as its own syllable. Okay. The next kind of tricky thing is L and R. These are called liquids. You don't need to know that necessarily. The general idea is this. When you have certain consonants, they're called mutes, right? Again, not necessary to really understand it, right? That's more grammar jargony. But B, C, D, G, K, Q, P, and T. When they're followed by an L or an R, these are what we call the liquids, L and R. It can either be, so the syllable in front of the L or R could either be short or long. It could be either one, right? And if that sounds confusing, it is a little bit, honestly. It takes a little bit to get used to, but you can use it as either long or short, whatever fits your meter. So I gave you an example from Catullus 1 down below. You have the word patrona, right? So the A in patrona looks like it should be a long sound because it's followed by a T and an R, right? Two consonants. Except you have R there, which is a liquid. So in this case, I'll show you actually this line later on, that A is going to be short to fit the rhythm or the meter of this line. That gets confusing because I just taught you when you have a vowel followed by two consonants, it's always long, right? Long by position. This is the exception, the L and the R. So whenever you see L or R, you always want to look and try to ask yourself, is this going to be long or short? How does this fit? Okay. The next thing you want to keep in mind is H. So H isn't a sound, right? So when we think consonants, vowels, they're made from your mouth, your throat a little bit, right? Your teeth, your tongue. H is what we call an aspiration. It's just you letting out a puff of air, right? It's a ha sound. So any word you try to say with H, what the H is doing is just kind of symbolizing that you're breathing out, right? So words like habe in this line or hoke, right? The H is just a puff of air. Okay, does not count towards the meter. So in other words, we're not counting H as anything. We're not counting it as a consonant. We're just pretending it's not there in terms of Latin poetry because it's really nothing more than you puffing out air. Okay. The next thing you want to think about is this consonantal I. So what I mean by that is you might remember back from when we really dove into Latin pronunciation. Again, if you watched my other video, you might know this. The I is really J when it's a consonant. So in English, I and J are really the same thing. J is just a consonant form of the vowel I. What that means is when you have an I and it's at the start of a sentence, of a word rather, and it's followed by a vowel, it makes a Y sound. It's almost like a Y. So it's acting as a consonant. So in this line, the first word is not iam, right? Two syllables. It's one, it's yam. Okay, so that's technically a J, almost like a Y, followed by a vowel. So your syllable is just ya. okay? Again, the reason we say this, one, for pronunciation, but two, if you didn't remember that, you might think that that word, IAM, is 2 syllables because you're like, oh, there's 2 vowels. Not quite. That first one is really a consonant, that I. And you see this in names like Jupiter and Juno, right? Jupiter and Juno. The I is really a J. That's why you have it turn into J in English. Okay, so those 4, hopefully that makes some sense. It might take a little bit of getting used to, but hopefully you're doing all right so far and you're not completely overwhelmed. Because the 5th one is where it gets a little tricky. This is elision, okay? Every Latin student's favorite thing. So for all my students, a lot of them get stuck with elision because it just doesn't feel quite natural at the start. And, you know, definitely your teacher, I'm sure, right? Mr. C would never trip this up. Even I make mistakes on this. It takes a little bit of time to get used to. But when you have 2 vowels back to back in a line, they do what's called elision. So they're going to elide or kind of smush together. You're going to get rid of one and combine them into one syllable. And the reason for that is really pronunciation. So if you look here, we have the word pumice and expolitum. So if you try to say that pumice, right, you can hear yourself kind of choke on it a little bit because you're saying You're trying to repeat 2 E's. It doesn't feel natural. Well, Latin doesn't do that. It elides, right? So you might have seen this before. These 2 words are going to smush together. You're going to get rid of the E on pumice, replace it with the E on X, and it's going to be pronounced pumicex, right? You're going to kind of slide them or elide them into each other. It's much easier to say, but it does have an impact in your meter because you're basically getting rid of a vowel. So that E on pumice, right, the final E does not count for anything. I'll show you when we kind of do our scansion what I mean by that, okay? Another thing you might want to keep in mind is elision happens when that vowel is followed by an H, right? We just covered why, because H isn't really a thing. It's the aspiration. So in this line, you have quare and you have habe. If you try to pronounce that, you have quare ha, right? It's a ha. That H doesn't count. So this is actually going to smush together because it's really an E in quare followed by an A in habe. So when you smush them together, get rid of the E, the H doesn't count, and you're ending up pronouncing this as quarabe, right? So you're kind of getting that quara, right, and eliding into the A. So it feels a little weird at first, but, you know, the more you do this, the more natural it will become, right, eliding vowels, because you don't want to just have the repetition of vowels is the idea. This is the trickiest, I would say, part of elision. So when you have a word using one of these accusative singular endings, so am, em, they're going to use elision on those as well. And it doesn't feel natural because the M is at the end of it, but it does elide. Okay, so if you have a word ending in am, and the following word starts with a vowel, there's going to be elision. So in this line, you have cum ausus, right? Ow is actually a diphthong, but same idea, vowel or diphthong, it's going to work. So because you have the um in cum followed by the au, you smush them together. Get rid of the um and replace it with sort of au. You blend the words together, and this is going to be pronounced causus. Okay, as if it was one word, because cum ausis doesn't really fit. And if you tried to write out the meter, like marking all the syllables, you'd have too many unless you did this. Okay, so elision is a big thing. Hopefully we're feeling pretty good about that. If you get stuck, go back, watch the video, read it, you'll be okay. But hopefully it's not too crazy at this point because it is sort of a lot to throw at you. So what do we do with all this? What are we doing with all these rules? Well, you put them together into what we call meter, right? The rhythm of the poem. And to put the meter together, you need to understand the feet, to go back to that idea. Remember, the feet are really combinations of sort of rhythms or beats within a line of poetry. These are the 5 that you see most often. You have a dactyl, right, which is a long, short. So lesbia, right, long, short. Then you have a spondy, which is a long and a long, so doctis, right? In both those, in the name lesbia, the E is long because it's followed by 2 consonants, the S and the B, and same with doctis, right? It's long because it's followed by, the O is long because it's followed by a C and a T, okay? An IM is a short long, like lego, right? So it's really le-go, you're kind of holding on to that O. A trochee is the opposite, long, short, so rai-da. And then you can use something called a coram, which is long, short, long. So de-lick-i, right? So de is long, icky is 2 shorts, and I is long, the diphthong. So when you have these different kinds of feet, you put them together into what we call meter, and this is where everything kind of comes together. The meter of a poem is the rhythm it's going to be using. It's a pretty strict set of rules, so you can't just write anything in Latin. It needs to follow a particular set of rules to work as Latin poetry. So it's basically combinations of these feet, which are really combinations of syllables. So when you put it all together, you can end up with something like this. I'm not going to show you all the different meters, but this is one of the more famous ones, Dactylic Hexameter. So I have a screenshot here of what it looks like. it's 6 feet. The sort of straight line down is showing you where the breaks and the feet are. They're either all dactyls, right? So long, short, short, long, short, short, long, short, short. They're either all dactyls or the first 4 can be replaced with spondees. So you could actually go long, 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 long if you're trying to lengthen it out. This is a really famous meter. This is the one used by Virgil, right, in the Aeneid. You see this a lot. It's sort of that epic meter. So this is one you'll probably run into, okay? Another type of meter is the one I was showing you with Catullus 1. He's using something called hendecasyllabic. So this is 5 feet, and the first foot can either be a spondee, long, long, an iamb, or a trochee, so either short, long, or long, short. That's what that jumble in the first part of the screenshot is showing you. The rest, the second foot is a dactyl, so long, short, short. Then you have 2 trochees, long, short, and then the final foot, the 5th little piece, is either a spondee, long, long, or a trochee, long, short. So there's a little bit of maneuverability in it. But the idea is these meters, right, are kind of restrictions on how the lines can sound and what beat or rhythm they have. This is what makes Latin poetry. So hopefully you're not in a pretzel and you're feeling like we can figure this out. It's better to see examples, which I'll give you. But that's the idea. The skill of Latin poetry is not rhyming words. It's picking words in a specific order to match the rhythm of your poem, right? The rhythm you've chosen. That's what makes these poets so great, and why I personally always appreciate what they're able to do, because it's very difficult, right? It would be difficult in English or any other language. In Latin, it's the same thing. It's choosing words very carefully. There's really an art to it. So here's the trick to meter. To do what's called scansion. Scansion is when you write down all the long and short syllables and try to piece out what the meter is. The trick is if you know the meter in advance. So if you know that Catullus is writing in hendecasyllabic, you know what it's supposed to look like. Or if you're reading Virgil, the Aeneid, and you know it's Dactylic Hexameter, you know what it's supposed to look like. That's always good, and it'll help. But you can still scan or kind of get the beat of Latin poetry, even if you don't know. Just follow the rules we laid out. Mark every syllable as long or short, and you'll come up with the right rhythm almost by accident. Even if you didn't know what you're looking for, you'd still figure it out. The trick, practice makes perfect, and I can't say this enough. You need to read these poems. If you're not in the habit of reading Latin aloud, you got to start doing it. It's almost impossible, I would say, to do this in your head unless you're really musically inclined. You need to start reading it. These are not meant to be like essays or history. It's poetry. It's supposed to be performed. It's supposed to be sung. You got to read it out loud. So find someone to read to, or annoy your family members, whatever it is you have to do, but get it out loud. Okay. So if you're feeling okay and you want to move on, let's do some examples. If not, go back and try to piece all this out where your teacher can help you too if you're just trying to get the hang of it. But here's some examples. All right. And this is Catullus 1. I mean, I'll do different videos kind of walking through the scansion of these poems, but this is just a few lines to give you the idea. This is in hendecasyllabic meter, right? So you have cui, dono, lepidum, novum, libellum. And again, it's weird to read this without actually putting the meter because it's sort of like reading song lyrics out loud. It sounds really stupid. Same thing here. So cui is a diphthong, has to be long. Do is long by nature because there's a long mark there. That's my first foot. Long, long, it's a spondee. Right? And down below, the dash symbol is long, the U symbol is short. Then you have no, the second half of the word dono is long by nature because of the O. Then you have lepe. Both of those are short. There's nothing to lengthen them. That's my dactyl, no lepe, right? Long, short, short. Doom is long by position because it ends in an M and it's followed by an N. There's a consonant cluster there. No is short. There's nothing to lengthen it. So you have doom, no. Right? Long, short. The wum in novum is long because you have an M followed by an L. That's our liquid. It could have technically been long or short, but it's going to be long here because hendecasyllabic, that fourth foot is a long followed by a short. Then you have the le in libellum. It's short. There's nothing to lengthen it. The final foot are two sort of sounds here. You have a long, bell. It's long by position because you have two L's, two consonants. So bellum, there's our long, short. And a lot of times you can see in Scansion, we put an X at the end of the line. It means it could have been long or short. You know, that's what you're kind of signifying there. So this is technically short, but you could put an X if you want, if you're following the pattern, but either way. So this is not read as cui dono lepidum novum libellum. It's got a beat to it. It's cui do no lepidum novum libellum, right? It's got sort of a beat to it. Bum, bada, bum, bada, bum, right? It has a rhythm. That's how this line goes, okay? Here's another one. You have arido, modo, pumice, expolitum, or expolitum rather. You're following the meter. A in arido is long because it has a long mark, the long A. Re is short, so we have a, re, right? Long, short to start. The do is long in arido. You have do modo. There's our dactyl. Modo is two shorts, right? That's why it shows up in poetry a lot, because you can kind of build dactyls out of it. So you have a, re, do modo, right? Do modo is your dactyl. The U in pumike is long because it's a long U. The I is short. There's nothing to lengthen that I. There's no long mark. There's not a consonant cluster. It's short. Then we have elision. I showed you this earlier. You have K and X. They're going to elide into kex, okay? Now that E is long by nature, or sorry, long by position rather, because it has an X after it. X is really K and S put together. It's two consonants on its own. But even if you didn't know that, it's XP. So there's actually three consonants after it. All of that is lengthening it. So the kex sound is long. The po is short. There's nothing to lengthen that O. The long I in expolitum is long. And then we end with a final short So again, it's not arido modo pumice expolitum. It's arido modo pumice expolitum. Right? It's got sort of that beat to it. And when you see this, it'll help you understand why poets like Catullus are choosing their words this way. He had to put pumice with expolitum after it because he can get that elision to fit the meter, right? The word expolitum also ends in a long short, which fits the meter he needs. So when you kind of break this down, what I always appreciate is it shows you just how good all these poets are with choosing their words extremely carefully. That's where sort of the craftsmanship and the art comes into play. Let's do one last line. So again, from Catullus 1, you have quale cumque quod o patrona virgo. That's how you'd read it. Again, kind of weird, but let's break it down. Qua long, because of the long mark. Le is short. There's no long mark and nothing to lengthen it. So it's quale, long, short. The cum is long because you have M and Q. The consonant cluster lengthens the U. The E, remember QU, that U doesn't count for anything. That's just the letter U. So the vowel I'm looking at is E. Que is short. So I need a dactyl. So I need long, short, short. Que is short and quote is short. Remember, the QU does not count. So this goes cum que quote. Okay. O is long. It's vocative. It's saying, oh, whoever, right? So there's a long mark there. Then we have the A in patrona. It could have been long, but here it has to be short to fit the meter, so you make it short. That's what the R, the liquid, is doing. So it's O, pa. Tro is long because of the long O, and then on patrona is short because it's just vocative. There's no long mark there. The I in virgo is long by position because you have an I followed by two consonants, R, G, and then you end with this spondi because the O on virgo is long. So if you put this together, you're saying quale cumque quod o patrona virgo, right? Bum, 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 bada, bum, right? It's got that beat to it. Okay, so it's very musical. The more you play around with this and do scansion, I'll make more videos showing you how to do this, right? Scanning actual poetry. It gets easier, right? Once you know the meter, you can figure it out, and then you just fill in all the rules of, do I have elision? Do I have diphthongs, consonant clusters? You put it all together and you will end up with the right answer. So let's just recap. There's a long video, a lot there. The short is this. When you're doing Latin meter and scansion, it has a rhythm, right? Poetry has a rhythm. We call it meter. It's based on the length of syllables, not necessarily rhyming. Any rhyming is probably by accident. Well, I guess it could be on purpose too, but it's not about rhyming. The syllables are either long or short. You learn the rules on how to know which is which. The lines are broken into what we call feet. They use specific combinations of syllables like dactyls and spondies, things like that. And the meter of the line is a fixed set of feet in a rhythmic pattern. So each foot is very specific, right? And that's what the different meters like dactylic hexameter or hendecasyllabic are, okay? And lastly, scansion is when we mark the syllables as either long or short so that we can follow the rhythm of the poem, right? Ancient Romans didn't necessarily need to do this, but we do, right? Unless you're really good at this and you can do it in your head. But either way, this is what meter is, scansion. This will get you a really good start into Latin poetry. If you have any questions at all on this, feel free to put them in the comments below. I'm happy to help you out. But otherwise, get out there, find a poem, look up the meter and try to scan it. The more you practice, the better off you're going to be. Good luck.